Turn it over to 4.
I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving.
Wasn't long enough.
Not enough leftover.
Thank you.
I felt like we ate so much in such a short amount of time. It's like a sprint.
My cousin
Scott?
is the operations manager for the embassy over in Saudi Arabia,
Oh my.
and he got to come in and surprised us for
That's
Thanksgiving.
awesome.
That was so cool,
That's cool.
because I missed him. So happy.
Very cool.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, guys. Welcome to the Thursday, December 5th, 2024 City Council Business and Community Affairs Committee meeting. We have one item on our agenda tonight. Actually, the first item is going to be postponed until next month, and that is the discussion regarding the creation of a tax increment finance master plan. And so we're just going to skip ahead to item number 2, which is discussion regarding shopping carts. And I believe that we have a presentation. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So this has been a hot topic ever since I joined the city back in late May. So I certainly have had a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of meetings regarding this. So I think we wanted to come today to give you guys an update to kind of let you know what's been going on, what we've been working on, and sort of where we're headed in the future with this. So of course, abandoned shopping carts, we've all seen it in the city. I think that was one of the first things I sort of noticed when I moved back to Norman earlier this year. So the reason why we're here discussing it is because obviously we want to work on reducing the clutter. We want cleaner neighborhoods. We want to improve our public image. And then, of course, bottom line, we want to reduce our city and business expenses and that it's costing everyone. So this is sort of what brings us here today. So first of all, I really wanted to kind of address what the impact has on our city resources, and it's pretty significant. So it's going to impact a good majority of our departments within the city. So obviously with transportation and traffic management, carts being in the roadway creates a hazard and a safety issue. They also can damage sidewalks and streets, causing costly repairs. Of course, with our utility services, waste management, litter control, it creates sanitation issues. The carts themselves can be retaining water, creates all sorts of breeding ground for mosquitoes and other pests. And again, our law enforcement are already stretched really thin. So again, when these things occur and they are in a critical area, oftentimes law enforcement are brought in to help sort of remedy the situation, which again brings resources that could be spent on something else to address this. And then bottom line, it's diverting all of our city resources in order for us to address this. In working with, there's 2 really main departments that kind of lead the effort for this, and this would be our Parks and Recreation Department as well as our Utilities Department are the ones really kind of doing the bulk of the work and trying to address either recovering them or getting them returned to the local businesses. And so on average, we're seeing about 10 to 15 carts per week. That's been pretty consistent over really the last few months. I think what has changed is the carts, as the weather starts to get colder, we're seeing that the carts, the expansion of the carts maybe starts to shrink around the overnight shelter. And so we're seeing them a little bit more concentrated within, again, the downtown areas and everything surrounding the shelter, as opposed to being all over the city. Another change that we're seeing was that a lot of the carts over the summer, when they were abandoned, clearly had just what appeared to be a lot of just garbage or things that, again, they were abandoned for a reason, things that the folks were no longer utilizing. But now I think staff is reporting that they're seeing more things like coats and blankets and more winter weather type stuff. Yes.
I was gonna say, sometimes what might look abandoned might be because of an arrest. And I'm gonna defer to Rick, and I don't know how often that happens, but would you say when homeless people are arrested and they have their cart, pretty much they're gonna lose their cart?
They're definitely probably gonna lose their cart. The issue for the officer, arresting officer, has to do with, one, does he know that the person is associated with that cart? And if so, they probably should be taking the stuff to property custody, which is out on West Lindsay, but then there's a bit of a disconnect in that once that person gets out of jail, who knows if they know where to go to get their stuff.
Yeah, so I just wanted to identify a gap in that regard, like, yes, somebody could walk away for mental health reasons or whatever, and then some people are dispossessed of it.
Yeah, and clearly, we have had a lot of conversations with our police department as well, and Chief Foster and his crew, and Major Shattuck, and our understanding is when they identify, or there clearly seems to be more of a personal item, like a bag or a backpack, if there's anything like a wallet or a purse or anything, then they do go ahead and, as Rick indicated, take possession of that and store that for that individual. But again, whether they realize it's been stored or not after they're being released from incarceration, that remains to be seen.
That seems like something, if the county wants to partner in a very low effort way to, hey, the city might have your stuff, here is the number, or some way to let them know upon release if we do have their things.
Yeah, so we're certainly working on, again, sort of refining that process, but that's a good thought, or a good comment. Also wanted to mention that in addition to just diverting staff and resources to go retrieve the carts, oftentimes we find that there are large encampments in our drainage areas. And so we had one over the summer, you might recall, at Lindsay and McGee, that there was a large encampment, and it wasn't just an encampment of individuals seeking shelter, but it was also with a lot of shopping carts that were blocking the drainage as well. And it became very costly for the city to remedy that. In fact, it cost nearly $50,000 for us to get that all cleaned up and everything pulled out of that. But shopping carts were sort of at the heart of that as well. More recently, over on 12th Street, just south of Alameda, there was another situation where we had to go in and remove a lot of shopping carts from the drainage area, and that was around a $5,000 cost. It wasn't quite as costly, but still, there are resources that are not normally budgeted for that we're having to then identify resources to cover as they occur.
I mean, that's a month's worth of shelter expenses right there.
That's right. So I wanted to just quickly highlight, the mayor mentioned as we were just coming into this meeting that there's been a lot of conversations and various meetings over the past year or two regarding this. So I just wanted to mention that Anthony Purington came to this to the BACA meeting on May 4th of 2023. We've had a couple of meetings with the chamber and impacted businesses. There was one in June of 2023, and then I had one in earlier in October where we met. We invited all of the retailers that were impacted or that basically you could have a cart from. But of course, we all know there's one major retailer that most of the carts are coming from. I'm happy to report that retailer did show up, and we had basically all of the stores represented, as well as their regional manager was there as well. And we had some really good conversations with them. So basically, what they had committed to.
Real quick, was there anybody that wasn't represented? And you don't have to name names. It just were basically all of the major retailers present.
Not all the major
Okay.
retailers were there. I would say the one with the majority, and I think staff have reported that 90% of the carts are from one retailer, and so that's the majority of our problem is really just this one.
Appreciate that.
But they were the ones who happened to be there. So other smaller retail were not, but they were invited. But the conversation with the one retailer was pretty productive. They committed to actually increasing their efforts on their end to go out and retrieve abandoned carts. They have a service that will go out, and right now it looked like they were basically going to hit it weekly, but it was going to be focused on the different stores within the city. So like in 1 week it would be areas over on the west side, the next week it'll be areas over on the east side, and so they were going to rotate around. The other thing that they were doing was they were also in the process of hiring a landscape crew to help manage all of their stores within the city for landscaping purposes, but they were also going to utilize them to also retrieve carts as well. Yes.
So in their retrieval efforts, will they go as far to retrieve the carts that cause blockages like what we just saw in that previous picture?
No, it was just the abandoned ones that are visible like from the street or Yeah, so I think when we're talking the storm drains, that's gonna be something that the city and that we are looking, I think I saw Scott walk in, that we're gonna, be the ones making sure that that's being done properly and handled. Because oftentimes, and in the situation with the Lindsay and McGee, there were hazardous materials. And so we had to actually have almost like a hazmat crew go in and with special equipment and, and dressed everywhere, all suited up in order to be able to retrieve all of that because it was a potentially dangerous situation on the items that they were retrieving.
Is it like bleach or just motor
Well, I say
oil
hazmat,
or-
it was more like needles and,
Oh, gotcha.
and then just, okay,
Did they give any indication if they'd be willing to basically take notifications from us? Like if we get a call to the action center, there's carts here, we send
Yes.
them to the retailer. And
yes,
It's not
yes.
just they kind of go find them on their own, but they work in hand with us.
yes, all of the above.
Okay.
So, but because that service is not, I would say on call.
Sure.
And I think at the time, I'm not exactly sure where they stand with their landscape crew on whether that's been fully hired or not. So those are some of the follow-ups that we need to do at this point. But in the meantime, that's where staff are still having to go out and go ahead and retrieve those, sort of on as needed basis.
There's several times that I've called the manager about having carts within a week, they're gone. It's not that next day,
Yeah,
but they've been good about getting them, or they are gone.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could even send them a batch report every Monday that's got, this is what we got reported over the weekend. I'm sure there's a way to put it together, but just a way to help us notify them so they're not just relying on their own eyes to pick them up. I think it's a collaboration.
and I think we've talked a little bit about doing that as well. I think most of the time right now, when we're getting the calls, we're just trying to remedy the situation as quickly as we can. And
Right.
so when crews are out or when we've got
Right.
our personnel out in the field, then they're gonna go ahead and take care of that right now. But that's something that we're continuing to work on, yes.
Do we do messaging with the community about like, oh, if you need to report a cart, you're reporting it to the action line?
No, we have not yet, and so that's also next step, so you'll see that in a future slide, so. So basically in that meeting, because they had agreed to do increased efforts, they were hiring a crew that at some point we will be able to have more of an on-call and call them and say like, hey, at this location, we've got carts reported, can you please go take care of them? We thought that it would be good to do a 6-month trial to see where we land. Internally, we're also starting to track, again, exactly more, or we've sort of been tracking it, but we were gonna do a little bit more detailed tracking on exactly the dates, the locations, how often we're having to go do this, retrievals. And so, and see where our numbers are and see where the metrics are at the end of the 6 months, which would put us really, into March, because we did meet back in October. So we're proposing to reconvene with them in April of 2024, and then again, we'll continue to track those metrics. Also, what I've been doing is a little bit of research on actions taken by other cities. So in Oklahoma, at this point, there are no cities in Oklahoma that have a shopping cart ordinance. Tulsa started to go down this path last year and started to talk about passing an ordinance or of some sort, having either some sort of containment system or penalties associated with if you have a cart that's off-site. But they did not pass that. So it sort of kind of got law, or kind of just died, if you will. So I understand it was maybe part of a mayoral race that might have been part of that campaign. But what they did do is just right before Thanksgiving, they announced a pilot program that started this week. And basically they have partnered with the Tulsa Authority for Recovery of Energy, or the TARE. And they provided a $100,000 grant to Tulsa. Actually, it was at the request of research. The grocery chain had reached out and said, look, we saw this in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was successful. And so what it is there's a company called Cart Repo that was founded in Albuquerque, and their whole business model is retrieving those carts on demand, and then they're storing them, and then they will resell those carts back to the retailers at a reduced rate, because obviously the carts are very expensive. They're anywhere from $300 to $500, depending on what kind of system, if they have a containment system on or not. So, I actually reached out to Cart Repo and I got a response finally today, right before this meeting. So I will be meeting with them on Monday to get more information about their service and see what they're doing and how much it costs. Now, of course, I'm sure there's gonna be a cost associated with it. But really, I just kind of wanted to talk directly to them to see what it is and see what options might be out there for the future. So when we come back and talk about this a little bit more. So I thought that that was interesting.
Something I'd really like to explore on that is almost like we do with the animal shelter. Like if we pick up an animal, we microchip it and sit before we release it back. So if we're picking up carts, put a tracker on them before we get them back to the retailer potentially. But I also heard about that program. I went and researched a little bit. I guess the one in Albuquerque, they collected over 2,000 carts in 1 month with this pilot program. So just sounds like it's got some real wheels to it.
Yeah, no pun intended.
It's got wheels, yeah.
Or pun intended.
Let you decide.
So we'll continue to monitor that. I will say though that in the program and what staff are doing right now, we're kind of doing that to some degree right now. Again, it's just we don't have necessarily funding dedicated for it, but staff are already kind of retrieving, and wherever the closest location is where that cart is from, they're gonna actually just return it because we don't want to necessarily store it on site. So I'm looking at Jason because I know it's mostly Jason's crew that's been doing this a lot. Chris's crew was doing it some, but I think it's been reduced a little bit. You haven't had as many.
Councilman Grant.
I'm kind of curious because that day labor van is on the horizon in January, if I remember correctly. What does that look like when y'all go retrieve the carts? Is that something that our day labor van crew might be able to do as well?
For us, just to go pick up carts is usually
Like a truck?
parks mainly focus on city property, so it'd be parks, of course, city hall, any other properties it's on. Sometimes we'll occasionally get a call if it's in the right of way and one of our crews can pick it up, but depending on where it is and how much things or stuff's in that cart, it usually takes, and mind you, when we do this is taking time away from our on-task activities. So if we have a mowing crew and we have what we consider a cart, or depending where it is, especially if it's near a creek or a high traffic area, we try to go out there and get it as quick as possible because it's a lot easier to clean it up when it's upright and things are stuffed in the cart instead of when it blows over and it gets out. But usually it takes two guys anywhere between 20 minutes to an hour, depending on where the cart's located and how much effort it takes to pick up. I know that when we have ones in creeks, we usually have to get out heavy equipment to get those out because it's
Not
bad
gonna
angles
be a
where to
day
get it
labor crew, but maybe, so not, if it's in the creek, it's not gonna be a day labor crew, it's gonna be specialized, somebody who knows how to operate.
Well, it's just somebody, it's not gonna be an on crew, we're gonna have to basically do a work order to go pick that up.
Oh, so a contractor comes out?
Nope, no, it would still be us, we have heavy equipment, we just have to do a work order and schedule a full, instead of two people going over there, like a full crew to get it out of the creek.
Okay, so they won't be doing that, but potentially could out of the right of ways,
Depends on what the response time is too, because our guys can probably pick up a cart within an hour. When you're talking about calling Walmart and they're like, we'll get it this week, sometimes you can't wait a full week to get
Right.
Yeah,
that cart picked up.
My supervisors usually don't wanna call a guy off a route to go pick up a cart, because we got jobs to do also. And so usually our supervisors will take a pickup truck and ask another supervisor to go with them, and they throw it in the back of the pickup truck and drive to Walmart and drop it off. That's pretty much what they do.
What do you do with the stuff that's in it, if there
If
is?
it's a lot of trash, we dispose of it.
Okay. I was just curious if there was overlap there, given, the public places they can clean.
Sure. Okay, so I also started looking at other cities within the country as far as what they have done, because clearly other areas have passed different ordinances related to shopping carts. A lot of them have very similar sort of thoughts, or there are responsibilities on the retailer side. There's usually outlined how they're gonna retrieve them once the carts are abandoned, any type of enforcement or penalties. How are you storing or returning the carts? And then, of course, their overall impact and effectiveness. And of course, at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. They just want to clean up their neighborhoods and reduce that clutter. So I wouldn't say there's not a lot of glaring differences. It's just really kind of what you want to focus on. There's going to be really two areas that you can kind of center the ordinance on, or you can address both. It's really going to be the individual in possession of the shopping cart, and do we want to assess penalties and fines related to that if they're clearly in possession of a shopping cart that's not on a lot, a retailer's parking lot? Or do you want to put the burden on, more so on the business itself to have a containment system? And we don't necessarily have to dictate how that containment system goes. It could be that they have more staff to retrieve the carts from the parking lot, so they're not sitting in the queues out in the parking lots, for individuals to come take. Or it could be, again, you actually have a containment system that, the wheels don't work once it goes beyond the property line. So I won't necessarily go into all the details on this, but I just kind of wanted to show that there's a lot of cities that are trying to address that.
For me, real quick, just for me personally, I think the focus should be on the containment system, because in reality, the people that are stealing shopping carts can't pay fines. I mean, they wouldn't be stealing shopping carts if they had the financial means to do something else. So I think if we want to actually move the needle on this, I think the focus needs to be more on the business side. I don't want to be anti-business, but I'll come down to you second.
Well, I'll just add, is it anti-business if they're saving money in the long run?
Sure.
But okay, so I was glancing over all these options. Is Cleveland, Ohio, is that the most effective of the options that also implements containment?
I wouldn't, at this point, not be able to speak to which one's the most effective versus not effective. I think in my research, I was really just sort of looking at how are they doing this? How are they tackling this? And so I haven't, and hopefully when I come back, I can maybe have some more statistics or details.
Yeah,
But
I was interested because there said significant reduction, and I'm glancing over the impact and effectiveness. So I was like, oh, so what are they doing that is having a significant reduction? And so that's why I honed it on them.
So what I don't have on here is Atlanta, and so we had the benefit of our park staff actually going to a conference in Atlanta maybe about a month or so ago. And I think the one thing that everybody came back with, or at least Jason and then Wade, who's been sort of the front and center on this, was that apparently the shopping carts are not an issue in Atlanta. And so we did a little research or looking into it, and it's really, they had some pretty stiff penalties for folks who are caught with shopping carts.
And saying that doesn't mean they don't have homeless. We stayed in the downtown area, and the homeless population was high. It's just that they didn't have, I don't know what they were
They
doing.
had more encampments,
There was
shop.
not, you did not see a cart anywhere in the downtown area,
Did they have
or a loose cart, that is.
alternatives for folks that instead of a shopping cart, they had something else, like a little trolley or a bag?
I did not go look into that level, but I did look at, you're right, having options or alternatives to, okay, if we take all those shopping carts away, these folks, I mean, this is their life, this is all in this one area. Are there other like mobile storage systems that can be provided, or is there, lockers downtown somewhere, or
I've
is
seen
there?
a lot of people recently, not with shopping carts, but with those I'm gonna just say Academy Sports,
A
like
wagon.
soft wagon, yeah, a collapsible system. So
So that was something that I was also looking at, is, okay, so like if we do something and try to really ramp down on the, or ramp up on the enforcement, and do we provide an option for these individuals? Do we try to go that route and try to, okay, we're not just gonna take it away without giving you an option. So, but there, again, it's really just that, it's like you either provide other type of carts or some sort of community locker, that they have access too. So there wasn't necessarily any, again, silver bullet related to that. It was sort of, those are the ones that, and I know Daryl has mentioned in the past, out in California, they sort of did the same thing where they had like it wasn't so much like a wagon, but it was more of like a cart on wheels, you know, like a tote that was on wheels that they provided, the
I guess-
unhoused.
You would probably look at it as a cost, like what are all the hidden costs of this, and homelessness in general? Then, you know, what is one of those little poly cart, I don't really know what you would call those things, the collapsible ones or the tote poly cart things. But you know, if they're under $100, and I bet that's a lot less than what we spend having these issues, so.
Mayor Heinkel.
I would argue that we're looking at this the wrong way. The store owners, the business owners, don't steal the carts. We know not to steal. We should. And so what we're doing is setting up a punitive system for the people that didn't do the crime. It's not really a crime. Didn't commit the act. And if they want to buy tote carts or whatever, whatever, there's no problem with that. The problem is that the carts get left out, and you can see how much money it's costing us to pick up somebody else's gear. I don't think that that Walmart or any of the other large retailers with carts want to necessarily push the price over onto us. I think it would be good for us to encourage them to put fencing systems or some kind of retrieval system like Aldi has to get your quarterback or whatever the deal is, however that wants to work. But I think we're looking at it backwards. The person that made the mess needs to clean up the mess. And so even if they can't pay fines, that's not our responsibility to make sure that they can pay fines. It's our responsibility to make sure that we don't have traffic hazards. It was 6 or 8 months ago, I got 2 in a row emails from people that were traveling down Robinson when the wind was coming, and there was a loose traffic cart, loose shopping cart, and it went out into traffic. And so, you know, I haven't gotten any since then. But I would look at it more as the responsibility of the persons and encouraging the businesses to help us. We don't want to fine them. We don't really want to bring them to jail. We don't want to do anything. But we got to get those carts out of there.
Well, maybe the compromise is something where there's more monitoring on the business side, so they don't leave the property in the first place. I mean, that goes back to containment, but I just think it's their property, and just like if they had a bunch of cardboard boxes stacked up on the side of the building and the wind blew it away, it's their property that has now left their property. It's their responsibility to clean it up. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong answer here. I think this is very much a balance of a lot of different ideas. So, Councilmember Hinkle.
I'm kind of in the same camp where I don't want to find the retailers. I do want them to be more proactive in taking care of their property, because right now, I mean, I feel like if it was any other product in their store, their asset protection would be all over it, but it's outside of the store, and so it's kind of an afterthought. But, and again, the people that are stealing the carts, or however you want to view it, they don't have the ability to pay those fines, and really what good are we doing there anyway, just writing tickets? What I would like to know is if we have the ability to create maybe a landscaping ordinance, and this goes back to the containment problem. But if you're a retailer that's going to have over X number of carts, then you have to have some sort of physical containment landscaping, like maybe there's a little wall that comes up that would just be hard to lift the cart over. Maybe we install cattle guards on the exits because you couldn't push a cart over a cattle guard. Things like that, and then, or the very simple things like what Aldi uses. So, I mean, you have to have some sort of control in place via ordinance, just to kind of curb the runoff from going. And if we can maybe wean some of the problem off, then maybe we can get ahead of the issues that we're having and look at it again and say, okay, now that we've reduced the amount that we're seeing, and then again, if there are fines imposed, I wouldn't be against creating some kind of cart checkout system that's a deterrent for the people who need that kind of transportation for their goods to deter them from using that, but also something that would be a lot easier to move than a shopping cart. That way, if there is something stuck, it could just be drug out really quick, and we would still have the ability to identify them and know. But it's not something that could get stacked up in a drainage pond or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think the key takeaways out from that were, there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. And so if we are gonna write an ordinance, it needs to have a series of potential solutions. Like you can do A, B, C, A and B. You can do kind of a mixture as long as you get the job done. But back to the penalty thing, I mean, you gave me an idea. I mean, what if the penalty was just community service? There was no financial penalty, but it was a way to, I don't know if they're the people that actually work on the cleanup crew or whatever, but it's a way to levy a penalty, or maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. To have some accountability with it, but it's not going to be a financial burden that these people are not going to be able to pay in reality. And so some way to dissuade the behavior, but not something that is just going to have no effect. So, Councilmember Grant.
Yeah, I like accountability for both sides. So I'm hearing blended plan, maybe some kind of containment, and that to start could be the plans that they're talking, when you talk with individual retailers. So all you have to do is like say, this is the plan. And then if you do get into retrieval, there could be fines for having to clean them out of a waterway. Or maybe a flat fine, whatever. I would say I like the idea of landscaping requirements on a retailer of a certain size, but I would just add that I understand that like Homeland can have a geo-lock on it and it can still end up in an adjacent neighborhood to mine because we did a cleanup. And it's like, how did somebody push this all the way from there into original town site, which is far away from where we found it, was far away from Alameda and 12th. Yeah, we can mean well, but there will be exceptions. But I do, with accountability with both sides, I was gonna ask, Rick, what is it, like we do warrant clearing, do we also waive fines for certain things?
There have been occasions when we have.
What does an individual have to do?
Well, I mean, usually if you get a citation in municipal court and you don't appear, you'll get a second citation for failure to appear. And the most extreme example is a seatbelt ticket costs you $20. But if you don't show up on a seatbelt ticket and you get a failure to appear, this failure to appear can cost you $750. So you've turned a $20 problem into a $770 problem. A lot of times when we do amnesty programs, what we'll say essentially is if you come in voluntarily and appear, because you also would get a warrant for your arrest. Now, a lot of times we don't necessarily go out and actively serve those warrants. It's just the next time you come into contact with a police officer, if they run your record and it shows you have a warrant, they do have the ability to arrest you and take you to jail. And we always talk to people about that. Usually tends to occur during the most inconvenient time for you. But when we do our amnesty program, usually it's, if you'll come in and voluntarily appear, the warrant will be withcalled, we'll dismiss the failure to appear, and then you may have to pay something on the underlying citation. Usually it's whatever the original recommendation would have been.
And are there penalties when you can't pay fines?
You know, a little bit of what I'm thinking about is when we started our juvenile program, and this is going to be back in the late 90s, the way we structured that was to give juveniles the option of paying a fine or doing community service. And the reason for that was, you know, most of the time, if it's a fine, it's just going to be the parents and the kid doesn't really suffer any consequences. But if that parent wants essentially their kid to have some accountability, make them do community service as opposed to just paying the fine. So it's a little bit of a hybrid in terms of we understand that the kid probably doesn't have the money to pay it. Now, some kids work and their parents have made them pay the fine out of their wages from their employment. But a lot of the parents would make their kids do community service. This is something you may be able to incorporate into that particular offense, for people that we believe can't pay the fine, so to speak.
And let's say we have this hybrid ordinance of a little bit retailer, a little bit individual. They have an option to have a collapsible cart or tote, whatever, and they've chosen a shopping cart and they're caught with it, and we're enforcing that and they get a fine. They can choose to do community service.
Usually it would be the recommendation made by the prosecutor, because the prosecutor, I mean, anytime somebody pleads, I mean, when there's a citation and they appear, they're gonna go through plea negotiations with the prosecutor. Now, you'll tell the prosecutor what you're gonna plead, and the prosecutor will tell you what they're gonna recommend. And there really isn't, I don't see a problem with that recommendation under those appropriate circumstances being community service, as opposed to, I mean, usually we would say to the alternative, either you have to pay a $100 fine or you can do 20 hours of community service. You pick, I don't care, it doesn't matter to me. Again, because there are some people under certain circumstances where that, for juveniles, where that family would choose to pay the fine as opposed to do the community service. From our perspective, it doesn't really matter to me which one you do. But again, a lot of families or a lot of parents would choose to put the responsibility on the child to go do the community service, because I wasn't out past midnight.
Yeah.
You were, you made that decision, so you need to suffer some of those consequences. So it really probably would be something along the lines of a standard recommendation for those cases. We could say is gonna be whatever the fine would be normally, or alternatively, you can do community service. Now, we also tell them, and this kind of sort of goes back to how that process has evolved over time, we're not gonna babysit you on a community service. If you wanna come and do the community service and you wanna show up on time and do what you're supposed to do, we'll give you credit for it. If you come and just goof around, we won't. So, I mean, part of the issue with regard to community service a lot of times has to do with, we talked about this a long time ago with Councilmember Gallagher, because he believed that we could just go to the jail, check out prisoners, and have them go do stuff. I said, well, what you're not understanding is you have to have somebody supervise them. And if it's prisoners from the jail, that's got to be a police officer. So you're going to have to take a police officer off the street and assign him that responsibility. And then we talked about things like, what if you're out by the lake picking up trash and somebody's got to go to the bathroom? You got to load everybody up, take them to the bathroom, and bring them back. So it isn't as cost-free as it might suggest. You're probably going to have somebody supervising. Now, when we first did community service for juveniles, we really just let them go out and work that out on their own. And then we found out that there was a kid that had to do community service for charges in district court. And a lot of times we would say, look, if you want to go do it at your church, if your family goes to church and you want to go do community service at your church, have them do the community service, have your church write us a letter saying they did the community service, and we're good with it. Well, some kid made up his own church.
Nice.
And not only did he make up his own church for his community service, he was very enterprising, and he was selling letters to his friends who would get in trouble. So we had been thinking about this, and about that time, we actually had an employee, a part-time employee in court. But that's what her job was to set up community service hours. She would arrange the hours with the different nonprofits, and then we would hire students to go be supervisors. And they would, like I said, they would just go, check you in, you showed up, did Rick do his work, or was he goofing around, he did his work. So we'll give you credit for that time. That worked, I think, pretty well.
How much do you think that kind of operation ran?
What's that?
Like every time you had a community service class, if you will,
Right.
How much does it take to pay the person who's got to supervise?
At that time, we were paying our supervisors about $10 an hour. So if they were set up to go do work at food and shelter for 4 hours, you're gonna pay that employee $40 to go supervise. And it probably is money sort of well spent. I mean, you think about it in terms of what I remember, a little bit of what I remember about being an undergrad. There was always that kid that had the job. I just go sit here I don't have to do anything, and I make like $10 an hour. This is kind of that job that I would think is really attractive to college students, because you really don't have to do a whole lot. You do have to show up. You do have to make sure the kids check in and do their work and so on and so forth. But other than that, it's not really a whole lot. It's not super difficult, and the pay is not that bad. So it's whatever hourly rate you set for that supervisor is going to be the cost associated with that particular program.
Okay. I guess I would also frame that as a cost benefit, like, oh, it costs so much to deal with this problem, and then if you're spending $40 for somebody to learn some lessons, I get maybe it's not 4 hours, like they gotta do it several times. Sounds like at least 5 more times if it's 20 hours.
Yes.
I don't know how do you determine community service hours for the infraction?
For us, it was pretty standard. It was 20 hours of community service. For one offense, usually the fine recommendation is somewhere around $200. So it's either $200 or you can do 20 hours of community service. That was generally the standard recommendation. I have not talked to Jeannie or Ryan, asked them if that's changed. I really doubt it has changed in any significant manner.
Okay, so that's kind of what we would be looking at if we wanted to go the route of doing fines for retailer or individual. Or I guess I don't know. Did we say what were the fines in these other ordinances?
They ranged from like $100 for their first offense to, if they were repeat, it would go on up to like 1,000 or something of that nature. So
And these were for the retailers with
no, those were for the individuals.
individuals.
The
Okay.
fines for the retailers really weren't, I guess there were some that had fines, but it was more about the cost of, like if, again, Jason's team had to go out and retrieve the carts, then it was a fine they had to pay in order to get the carts back. Or even just a fine they had to pay, period, because we were retrieving their carts.
Was it a flat or was it based on the hours?
It was a flat. It was more, again, same thing, like $100, $500, things like that.
Okay.
And our jurisdictional limit in municipal courts is $750.
Oh, okay. So no more than that. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
Councilor Dixon. And then
I was gonna say, I like the hybrid retailers and individual, kind of give them, everybody a little skin in the game. I like the community service, so that people can be held accountable if they have no money. I did want to ask Rick about just kind of the concept of like an attractive nuisance, like a swimming pool. So put a swimming pool in your house, don't you have to put like a fence around it?
Yes, you do.
So
Totally, you have to have that fence around.
I don't think it's that big of a deal to kind of see these shopping cart collections in the middle of great big parking lots as kind of an attractive nuisance. But I'm obviously not an attorney, so I was just gonna kind of run that by you.
More of a civil concept than it really is a criminal concept. I'd have to go back and look specifically at what the elements are with regard to attractive nuisance.
The retailer that we were meeting with, they said it would be roughly $175,000, $200,000 a store to put the containment system in per store. Or again, there's varying containment systems. I think they were thinking of the geofencing and, it goes beyond the parking lot, it doesn't work type stuff. So I think that's the most expensive, or I would imagine that's gonna be one of the more expensive. But just to kind of put that in terms of
10 carts per week, it's 52 weeks a year, it's 520 carts, $500 a piece. I think the money adds up pretty quickly.
We need their help.
Yeah.
And they're obviously not doing it on their own.
I think the lot, over the long run, the amount of money sunk into lost carts is gonna exceed the amount that it would take to put a system in. I feel like, I don't know. So that's a decision for those businesses, but Councilman Holman.
Yeah, I do like the idea of a kind of a hybrid model there. It does, on that previous slide, it looked like all those cities had some sort of held the businesses to some sort of accountability for it.
Yes, I'm sure there's some out there that I just didn't.
At least in this
Yeah, yes,
set.
yeah.
And, you know, as far as like being business friendly, Fort Worth is not a progressive city. I would just say that politically, and very business friendly, I would say. And they seem to have that fine for retailers. That's $200 a cart, and they charge the retailer per
Yes,
cart that they have. That the city
that's
has
my
to go.
understanding, but yeah,
That's an interesting one. Fort Worth and Santa Monica were the two that caught my attention the most. But I mean, some of the thing that I do worry about, I guess, is the people that are pushing these carts. If they don't comply. So there's a cost to arresting them, there's a cost to putting them in the county jail. And then for a low-level offense of being in possession of a shopping cart, I doubt the county jail is going to keep them very long. So are we creating just another thing where we have a revolving door of homeless people being arrested for a low-level offense and then being put just right back out again? And then so it's just a constant $60 a day for housing someone in the county jail. If they have mental illness and they don't comply, what do we do? If they're pushing a cart and they have a mental illness, are they going to agree to do community service? And are we going to arrest them for not complying if they're mentally ill? I mean, that can apply to anything. I mean, a criminal activity or somebody breaking the law is breaking the law regardless of who they are, but are we creating more work for the police department if they have to stop somebody who's pushing a cart and investigate them, and then they don't have an ID, so then the police have to try to find out who they are, and then they don't show up to their hearing, and now they've got a warrant out if we can find out who they are. So just some of those, I guess, ancillary. I'm wondering how they enforce whatever it is that they have that has resulted in no carts. Is it punitive? Is it some other way that they not incentivize, but de-incentivize people from doing it?
so I can certainly go back and actually try to reach out. And so what I have not done is actually reached out to these individual cities to talk to anybody other than in Tulsa. And so I can go back to Atlanta and find more details and go specifically to, okay, talk me through the process on where you guys were and where you're at now and how did you guys get here, type stuff, so.
Yeah, and I agree with the comment too from Councilmember Hinkle about, it's any other item in the store, they wouldn't let just somebody leave with it, right? Or they would pursue them in some way. They wouldn't just let them walk in and take a TV and leave, right? And this is a piece of their property, and is something that the city is having to accumulate costs to try to remedy. I think one of the interesting parts is the 90% of it being from one retailer. And so we know that the majority of this problem is being, I wouldn't say caused by this one retailer, but their property is the primary cause of this being a problem. So and with geofencing, I know the West Lindsay Homeland has the geofencing that they did on their own. I was trying to look on Google Maps there, and from what I could tell, looking at the parking lots, none of the other two homelands have the geofencing, the West Robinson and the East Alameda, just that West Lindsay one for some reason. And I don't know if any of our other grocers have the geofencing or not, besides that West Lindsay homeland. And I'd be interested at Lindsay and McGee issue, were the carts that were in there, were they mostly this one retailer? Since there's only one grocery store over there, and that's that homeland, and they have the geofencing, and there is a big national retailer, but it's a little over a mile to the north.
I have to go back and look at the photos. We got a lot of photos. I don't know if Scott, if you recall,
Well, I'd be interested to.
Yeah, I didn't know
I'd be interested to know how
color
successful
of the carts.
Homeland on West Lindsay has been at, since they put that in, do they have any data on how many carts they've not lost because of it compared to before?
Homeland touts that he actually grew by one cart. He brags that he
Yeah,
hasn't
that
lost any.
carts.
He attracts cards.
I don't know if that's true, but it's what he says.
So,
We did get some feedback from the one retailer we met with that the geofencing there can be a bypass. So apparently there's no way to bypass the locking mechanism with, I don't know, like a magnet or something, apparently, that, and I was like, well, these folks are geniuses as far as being able to figure that out, so, but apparently it's not completely foolproof, but it certainly curtails.
well, ideally, we could get voluntary, get the businesses to do it themselves for their own good, like Homeland on West Lindsay has done. And ideally, I'd like to keep, if possible, to not have the police involved in this issue as little, or have them as little involved as possible. It's like, do we want the police having to deal with someone pushing a shopping cart or retrieving a shopping cart? And so, like, currently, what is an issue where the police would deal with a shopping cart? It being on private property and the retrieval. Because one of the things I recall before was like, if you see a abandoned shopping cart in the middle of a field, it may be on private property, so you can't just go onto that private
Yeah.
property and take it off that.
It's not necessarily that they're being called out to go retrieve. That's again usually going to fall with Jason or Chris's crew. But it would be in the situation of that the individual was maybe being investigated for something else, and then they happen to be in possession of a shopping cart. So then the police have to stop and then deal with it at that point. And any belongings or possessions in there, and then they're going to have to retrieve that, and so on and so forth.
Police aren't having to like go retrieve any abandoned carts out of a field or something, right?
No.
Okay.
So I
Just wanna
apologize.
make sure that was
Yeah.
like that. I don't think I want them doing that, but and then yeah, I mean, definitely the cost, the issues with storm drains, if they're blocked, how that can cause flooding, and that could cause a lot of damage to private property and public property. So that's an issue.
Which is actually how we became aware of the Lindsay and McGee
Like McGee
situation.
popped back up.
It was flooding, and so we were like, well, that shouldn't be flooding. And so they went in to find out why that, when we had one of those large rain events over the summer.
Well, I'm definitely interested to know more about the pilot program in Tulsa. What Albuquerque, maybe a little more detail on what Albuquerque has done. If that's some sort of model program, I don't know. That cart repo company, if they're talking to any other cities around Oklahoma or this region.
I will find out. I'm talking with them. I have a meeting set up on Monday morning.
And then, yeah, that how does Atlanta, whatever their policy is, how are they enforcing it? Or, and yep, that's the ones I had. But that, like I said, that was just kind of a concern of can we get compliance from some of this population, and what is the cost of trying to?
Well, I think the question you asked, if there isn't compliance, what happens then? Somebody who's suffering a mental health crisis, like, do we really want to send people to county jail? Because I think that's a conversation for another time, but I absolutely think it's a legit concern.
Yeah, and it does look like those list of cities, seems to be a mix in all of them of retailer and general public.
I'd really like to see a cost benefit analysis of like what our own crew, our own staff, how many man hours we're spending a year on this, because if we can come up with $100,000 number or something, and then we decide to divert that money to putting the solution in place, then we're no longer just endlessly spending money down here on a endless void. We've actually got this like tangible progress that we can accommodate.
It's a great segue into my next slide.
Okay, I'm sorry, we keep.
Oh, it's fine. It's great. So let me just run through this real fast. So we've already kind of talked about most of this. That, there's really kind of two schools of thought. You have the individual responsibility, then you have the business, which of course is the possible containment system. One of the things that in researching this is in Pittsburgh, they actually have and many of them do as well, have a prevention and retrieval plan. So and I was able to get a copy of it. And basically, again, they're not dictating what the retailers have to do. They just have to have some sort of plan in place. And so it could be the containment system with the geofencing. It could be increased staff or commitment that they're going to go out and retrieve the carts themselves. It could be you pay a quarter, like Aldi. So there's all sorts of ways of doing it, but they have to submit a plan each store has to submit a plan, it's on file with the city. And so we kind of have record of it, so it kind of keeps a little bit of accountability, but it's not going as far as like, okay, we're gonna pass an ordinance and we're gonna start to impose the penalties. So there's sort of kind of like these phased approaches that we could do before we're passing, okay, here's where we're at, and we're gonna start fining the retailers and or the individuals at this point. So I think that maybe one of our next steps that we wanna consider, Councilmember Grant, you talked about community engagement. That's actually something that we do need to do in the future as far as like, okay, once we kind of have this ironed out. I think right now we're still kind of in this, I want to say, in this trial period with the major retailer to see kind of where we land at the end of March to see, okay, did we make any progress? Have we not? If we have made progress, do we want to continue down this road? Do we want to we'll come back and kind of talk about the results of all of that. And then of course, finally, we've talked a little bit about the penalties and enforcement and what that looks like. As far as like our next steps.
Oh, I was gonna say, I did also, like, even as we're working towards, you said March was an update with the retailer, we could be doing what Councilmember Peacock suggested. You know, if we tell people call action line when you see carts, and then do that kind of batch reporting to maybe just this retailer. There could be others. That could be an effective way or efficient way of getting it done. And then also smooth out the process for people who do get arrested, because I do hear Councilmember Holman talking about mental illness. But the sad fact is the shopping carts and the ordinance and all that will not touch the fact that somebody will likely get arrested, whether it's with a shopping cart or for something else like disturbing the peace or trespassing. So I'll just say to the personal, individual responsibility, community service, you could see it as a way to direct people towards services if they're to engage that route. But anyways, that was just what I wanted to say on alternatives, mental health, and then making sure those folks, like while we're educating the community about what to do when they see carts, also educating the people who are getting arrested, like this is where you can find your stuff.
Yeah, when faced with the carrot or the stick, I always prefer more carrot, less stick. Incentivize people to do the right thing, not punish them. Councilman Holman.
And yeah, I would just add too that I would be for the community service portion of it for sure. Trying to, if we can get people to do that, and then service connection being a part of that also, that response. But yeah, Mike just wanted to express the concern about what if they don't comply, and then what do we do? And then I really do like that idea of requiring a plan. Not requiring them to do a specific remedy, but the city would require you to have a plan for whatever you want to do, but you do the plan and then we have it on file. And then we can say, hey, we keep finding your carts here and here's what the plan you gave us that said you would. So I like that. That seems like it's not punitive on the business. It's not telling them what to do. It's not telling them to do anything. But it's not saying, it's saying they have to do something, but not anything that we just tell them.
Accountability on both ends.
So I like that for sure, that idea.
I think I saw Councilmember Hinkle first.
Just as a point to add on to that, I mean, maybe, I don't know if there's a permitting system, maybe you have to have a permit to have shopping carts at your retail business. And then maybe that's a renewable permit that you have to do every year, and then based on the amount of incidences falling outside of the plan, that's how your permit increases. So it's not necessarily a penalty, it's just an increased permitting fee.
You have to get a permit for a dumpster already and other things. I mean, I think that's very much in line with that. These are what's required for your type of business. It's part of the permitting process. I think that's fair. Councilmember Dixon.
Those were pretty much my exact words. Yeah, I mean, seriously, just permit. I mean, maybe it goes to zero if the next year if we don't see any of their carts anywhere. And maybe it goes sky high if they're all over town. And the plan is part of the permitting process.
And I think that the ones that you don't see their carts are the ones that already have something in place, and it's effective to a certain extent.
Okay, so we are proposing, or I'm proposing, our next steps to be, we continue to monitor the activity and continue to track the metrics associated with it. We were talking, we really need to do more of an in-depth analysis of the cost estimates, staff time, the pooled resources from preventing us from doing other jobs, just everything associated with it. And so I think we'll come back with more of kind of a summary on what it's costing. Let's say and we'll just do an average, per cart retrieval, this is what we're finding, average time. I think, Jason, you said your staff, it's anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, and it's a team of 2. So anyway, so we'll kind of come back with that.
Well, and it's not even just the hard costs, it's the opportunity costs that come along with it.
That's
Because
right.
that hour that they're spending doing that,
But they're not doing,
doing.
exactly.
So it's not
Absolutely.
it's exponential.
Then again, we propose that we'll meet with the businesses again in March and come back to Baca in April with sort of the results on, again, all of these different metrics, the cost estimates, how the meeting went with the businesses in March. And then maybe perhaps provide an update to council at a pre-conference meeting or a study session, and then sort of confirm sort of our path forward at that point.
Excellent.
So.
Councilman Rowland.
So because of one retailer making up 90%, I guess, of the carts that we're finding, is there any way to know why? Is it just because they have 6 locations in Norman?
I think just the volume, yeah,
And is there a way to know if it's any specific, which location is the one that they're coming from the most out of their 6 locations in Norman?
yeah, I don't think we
That
know
type
that. They might know that themselves, but I don't think that we know that, because again, it's just very generic. But that could be something that, again, we're looking at, so.
I'm sure each card has a serial number. You could be able to track it back pretty easily, but
Yeah, it might be helpful, for us to know where they're coming from, and if it's coming from one of the 6 stores or 2 of them, what are the other ones doing that are preventing it? Or are they not near that population that's taking them, whatever it may be. That might be helpful to understand it a little bit more too, and be able to focus resource or effort.
I just feel like if they're locking up my $8 shaving cream, then why can't they have some sort of control on a $500 card?
I can't check out at Food, Home and Garden anymore.
I'm sure the shopping cart is written off as a loss.
Right. Shaving cream be if somebody.
I don't know. I won't pretend to know the answers for that.
Yeah, so it's a pickle in the
I wouldn't say any questions, but I think we've kind of gone through this.
No, I appreciate the hard work on it. I definitely appreciate you letting us kind of put all the things on the table and talk about all the ideas. It's just it's a problem that I don't think there's a silver bullet. And I'm not sure. Obviously, everybody's kind of got a different approach. But shopping cart was invented here in Oklahoma, so we get the unique opportunity to try to solve this.
Very good. All
I
right.
appreciate it. Well, if
Thank
there's
you.
nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
I'd be scared if I was you.
I know, he's like,
She was gonna go.
we're synced up.
So.